Now we present Death at Bed End, starring Kenneth Cranham and written by Stephen Wakelam. This drama is based on true events and explores the controversy surrounding Elizabeth Gaskell's biography of Charlotte Brontë and the libel threat that followed its publication.
There was supposed to be two of us, but at the last minute, the constable had broken his hip chasing after somebody, and it was just me.
This is Keighley! Keighley!
We were only a small unit, Scotland Yard. The railways were opening new places then. This was the north, where I'd never been. The frozen north. It was Maytime, sleeting, windy, miserable weather. You needed your coat.
Where to, sir?
Haworth. Do you know it?
I was born there. Well, near enough.
Is it far?
4 mile.
I'd never seen moors. It was like being up in the sky.
It's spring in the south.
It comes later up here.
Bleak, brown hills, no hedgerows, stone walls.
Do you know a family called Brontë?
He's the parson. Getting on a bit now.
I'd no idea of the family.
You're a friend of his, are you, sir?
It makes me laugh now.
No. What's he like?
Well, I'm not really the church-going type.
Nor me either, but what's he like?
Respectable gentleman, you know. Are you in that line yourself, sir?
A clergyman? No.
His daughters wrote books.
Read any?
Oh,
You didn't know the son, did you?
Patrick.
Oh, I thought it was Bramwell Brontë.
Ranwell's what they called him.
They?
At the parsonage.
Did you know him?
I did, aye. What line of business are you in, sir? Can I ask?
Yes, I'm a policeman.
Oh. You're from London?
Yes.
What? Somebody done something wrong, then?
Something that happened some years ago.
At parsonage?
How well did you know him, Bramwell?
I knew him better when he was little, only to speak to later. Well, what's happened?
There's been a book published that's caused a fuss.
About him?
No, the daughter, Charlotte. But Patrick, as you call him, is mentioned.
Is it about that married woman?
I'd been warned there was some need for discretion.
Did people know about that?
Wife of a wealthy gent, weren't she?
What do you know about it?
Only what was said at time.
Go on.
He was going behind the husband's back.
Yes.
A fair few years ago, isn't it?
Yes.
Was she tied, so?
She is now. Widowed, then married again.
She lived York way.
Yes. How did you hear?
Everybody knew.
Because he was the vicar's son.
Bit of a scandal, you know.
Did you believe it?
Suppose I did, aye. So what are you? Are you some kind of detective, then?
Yes.
A proper detective?
Hope so.
You're not Scotland Yard, are you?
Anybody could employ a detective from us, if you'd got the funds. This was a publisher. Unusual, but it was an unusual case, and all a bit last minute. I thought they might have been German at first. The name Brontë, those 2 little dots over the E, but it was Irish. The father had come to this little place 30 years before. A one-street town, a lot of grey stone, not beautiful, workmanlike. Wool, the main trade. An inn, where I left my bag, said they were busy, but would fit me in. The church and the parsonage were at the top of the town, unsheltered. What you noticed first were the graves between the church and the house. It was crowded. I mean, below ground. Box graves, dark stone slabs. And he was there, just come out of the church. There really wasn't much mistaking him. An old man, though standing tall, with a shock of white hair.
Mr. Bronte,
Yes?
I'm Sergeant Down of the Detective Police, sir.
Oh, yes.
He was sightless, or nearly.
You had a letter from the publisher, George Smith, about our visit.
Oh, yes. Shouldn't you be here tomorrow?
Tomorrow?
We wrote back to you. My son-in-law...
I see. I came up on the night train, sir, there being some urgency.
We were hoping to put you off till tomorrow, you see.
I beg your pardon, sir. There were supposed to be two of us, but the constable has had an accident. I thought we were coming up early.
Is it serious?
Well, he'll recover. Only I'm doing the work of two men.
Well, I've never met a detective from Scotland Yard before, let alone two. So I'm a bit relieved about that. You'd better come up. What kind of accident?
He fell off a roof.
What was he doing on a roof?
Bit of a different job from this, sir.
Mrs. Gaskell had written a book, another novelist, though this was a biography and therefore supposed to be true. She'd been a friend of the Reverend's daughter, Charlotte.
I'm sorry Mrs. Gaskell has had so much vexation over the book. It was a first-rate piece of work.
Yes.
Have you read it?
The relevant passages, sir, and I got going on some of the rest on the way up.
The house was grey stone, square and plain.
Well, you don't mind dogs, do you? Come on, it's only me.
I've got one myself, sir.
We've had a number of visitors this morning, and they've got excited. Come in here.
I'd not known what to expect of the Reverend. In the book, I got a picture of a stern, unbending man, a bit mad.
I don't know why I got two, but they're company for one another.
I wouldn't be without mine.
We've got an event in the church tonight, so we might be interrupted.
I can keep it brief this morning, sir, if you just get me going.
How long are you staying? Oh, sit down.
Couple of days.
I'll just have a word in the kitchen and then... Come on, you dogs. We don't want you in here.
The study was plain. No maps or pictures on the wall. No curtains, though not unhomely.
Mrs. Gaskell gets some things wrong, of course, but she has great ability and bravery and a kind and good heart.
You know her, sir, Mrs. Gaskell?
Oh, I encouraged her to write the book. It's a subject of which she has first-hand knowledge. She knew my daughter.
Charlotte?
Yes.
But she gets some things wrong, you say?
Not over this matter of Branwell. I think the portrait of his tempter is a masterpiece.
Tempter?
He was seduced.
The lady, Mrs. Robinson as was, is denying it, sir.
She's lying.
You're certain of that, sir?
She's a brazen, hardened woman. She's capable of adultery in the presence of her family. She's capable of lying.
I understand that. It's proving it, sir, as you probably realise. The lady is prepared to go to court.
What does Mrs. Gaskell say to that?
Oh, she is uncontactable at the moment.
She lives in Manchester.
She's on the continent, Italy. Has been in Rome till lately, we believe. You helped her with the researches?
Yes, dates and so forth.
And she spoke, I'm told, to other people as well as you.
Assiduously, yes. She and her husband came to stay in Haworth.
Her husband has helped us with... was able to give us the names of some of her informants, the ones he was aware of.
He hasn't accompanied his wife to Italy.
No.
What names did the husband give you?
The sexton,
John Brown.
A close friend of Bramwell?
Yes.
I wonder if it'd be possible to...
He's dead, I'm afraid.
It's one of the... Mr. Grundy?
Yes, he was a good friend of Bramwell. I've not seen him for, he doesn't live in Haworth, though.
Still alive, though, sir?
Oh, yes.
Good, because a letter's gone out to him. It was the constable who was supposed to be doing the dodging around.
I understand.
And Mr. Nichols, your son-in-law.
He lives here. Keeps an eye on me, you might say. but didn't know Branwell, or not well.
What I have to establish, sir, beyond any doubt, is the grounds on which Mrs. Gaskell built up the picture of the guilty dealings with your son.
Mrs. Robinson was his employer, or his employer's wife. Used to getting what she wanted.
Did you meet her, sir?
Once, yes.
What was she like?
Well, I had no idea.
But on first impression.
Oh, a charmer. She bewitched him.
There were letters between them, I believe.
Yes, I believe so.
Do these letters still exist? Her to him?
No.
Mrs. Gaskell suggests he carried these letters in his pockets.
Well, he may have done, but they're long gone.
Were they destroyed?
I think my daughters may have destroyed them. I don't know.
Did you ever see them, sir?
I don't recall.
I know it's a painful subject, sir.
It's the kind of thing where my daughters would have kept things from me. Charlotte would have taken responsibility.
Is there any record at all?
Well, Anne would have known the most, of course.
Anne?
My youngest daughter. She was governess to Mrs. Robinson's daughters at Thorpe Green, where my son was tutor. Would have witnessed the whole miserable business.
Did she tell you about it?
Oh, no. Branwell did, finally.
Anything you could impart, sir?
No. These are conversations, painful conversations we had 10 years ago. He left me in no doubt about the nature of the relationship between him and his seducer.
Is that what he called her, sir?
No.
Well, it's a term Mrs. Gaskell uses herself in the book.
Then we came to the same conclusion.
She appears to quote Mrs. Gaskell from the letter of dismissal Mr. Robinson sent your son. A letter written in what sounds like anger.
And deserved. No question but that he was traduced. Mr. Robinson was a clergyman himself.
Was he, sir? I didn't know that. I thought he was more landed gentry.
And he came into property. I don't think he ever practiced as a priest.
Does this letter of dismissal still exist, sir?
No, it would have disappeared a long time ago.
It indicates that your son's, he calls it, proceedings were discovered.
That's pretty clear, isn't it?
It doesn't say what the proceedings were.
No.
Where does Mrs. Gaskell get the apparent wording of this letter from, sir?
She quoted from a number of letters. It would have come from Charlotte, most likely.
Would it be among your daughter's effects?
I don't think anything like that would have been kept. Perhaps she recalled it.
You see, if that was the correct wording, proceedings doesn't refer specifically to Mr. Robinson's wife.
No.
He didn't cut her out of his will or cast her off. There's no breach.
There's a mention of Branwell in his will. There's your evidence, Sergeant. Mr. Robinson specified in his will that his property was bequeathed solely on the condition that his wife should never see my son again.
There's a doubt about that, sir, I'm afraid. Mrs. Gaskell makes quite a point of that in her book, and I'm sorry to say that it may not be true. The former Mrs. Robinson's solicitors are quite adamant on this point. There is no mention of your son in the will. Where did that information come from, sir?
No, I would need to. I find it difficult to recall.
It's a long time ago.
The will wasn't changed or altered subsequently.
No, it's the big problem, sir. There has been some correspondence between the lady's solicitors and that of the publishers.
Branwell was quite... It's what he believed.
Your son told you?
I don't know where else I could have learnt it from. It was the principal cause of his distress.
Mr. Robinson died, I think, not long after your son's dismissal.
Yes.
And the will, or what your son believed to be in the will, was the main bar to your son seeing the widow?
She sent a servant here to Haworth to inform him.
She may have misinformed him, sir, you see. You never had any doubt, sir, that the relationship was as your son described it?
Why should I?
No, I have to ask these questions, sir.
She initiated the relationship. I don't think this was some young man's bravado. Not with me.
No.
Or fantasy. They were discovered.
Discovered?
By a gardener, is my belief.
Could you...
Mr. Robinson's gardener. at Thorpe Green,
Thorpe?
where the Robinsons lived.
That's very useful, sir.
Very unsavoury.
Do you know his name?
No. There was a lady's maid privy to a great deal.
How do you know this, sir?
She wrote to Branwell. At the time of Mr. Robinson's death, there was some message that she was passing on behalf of her mistress.
Not extant, sir, the letter.
No. No, and a letter from a medical man, a surgeon. He's mentioned in Mrs. Gaskell's book. Dr. Crosby. He sent Branwell money from the lady.
From the lady?
From Mrs. Robinson, yes.
Why would he do that?
I think he, too, was cognizant of the affair. He was a friend of Branwell's when he was over there.
He was surgeon to Mr. Robinson?
Yes.
But also a friend to your son. Does he still live in Thorpe?
I don't know. In that vicinity. He might know some of the
And
answers.
Thorpe Green is where, sir?
Near York.
Did you meet him?
Once, yes.
Do you think he would talk to me?
Whether he would over this matter or not, I don't know. He was an educated fellow, likeable. He took to Branwell. Here's my son-in-law. I fear we're going to be interrupted, Sergeant.
York. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Mr. Nichols, to whom I think it would be fair to say
This is the gentleman from Scotland Yard.
I was not a welcome visitor.
It's Sergeant Dine, isn't it?
Yes, sir. Very good to meet you, sir.
The sergeant is doing the work of two men, Arthur. Just like a clergyman.
But we weren't expecting you until tomorrow.
Dry, unyielding, and fiercely protective of his late wife, the Reverend's daughter, Charlotte.
There is a problem with the book.
Yes.
Though not insuperable. Mr. Nichols was not in favour of any kind of book appearing. But I knew my daughter would be in safe hands with Mrs. Gaskell.
I'm looking forward when I've time to reading the rest of it, sir. How far is Thorpe Green?
Thorpe Green.
It was still short of midday, and though it was a bit roundabout and inconvenient, it looks as if it had to be done. By taking the night train from London, I'd given myself the best part of an extra day for inquiries. It was 70 miles in all by Bradford and Leeds to York, but it gave me time to peruse the book, which I was beginning to find of more interest than I thought. Here were two of the main characters, the Reverend and his son-in-law, who I'd just met, stepping off the page. Miss Bronte, Charlotte, the subject of the book, was one of the Reverend's 5 daughters, all dead, the 3 who survived longest, all novelists of some distinction, and one boy, Branwell. It was a family name, and he was the family pride, who became a drunk and a wastrel.
Is it just for tonight, sir?
Just the one night.
I'd passed the house, Thorpe Green Hall, set back from the road, just as it was getting dark. There was one inn in the vicinity, the Bay Horse.
Not been the best of days for weather, sir. This room all right for you, sir?
This'll do me fine.
Have you come far?
London, via Howarth.
London via...
Howarth in Yorkshire, near Keighley. Have you heard of it?
Rings some sort of bell.
A family called Bronte live there.
Branwell?
Bullseye.
Did you know him?
Know of him.
Anybody round here acquainted with him?
And over supper, I was the only guest.
Everything to your liking, sir?
I was ready for this.
Oh, you've come a long way. My son said you were inquiring about Branwell.
I was talking to his father only earlier today.
I'd rehearsed my explanatory phrases coming in from York. It was a delicate matter, particularly so close to what we might call the scene of the crime.
I work for a publisher's.
Oh, yeah?
And there's a book that's just been published that's caused a bit of a fuss.
About Branwell?
In part.
Oh, I'd like to see that.
Well, you knew him then.
Oh, come in here sometimes.
You like to drink.
Oh, yes.
I was hoping she would prove a regular gossip. Invited her, if she'd a moment or two, to sit down.
What's this book say?
It's an unfortunate episode.
You mean Branwell and... It's about Mrs. Robinson.
Yes.
Oh, after all this time.
Well, you knew about... Well, people here, I mean, it's a delicate matter, I'm sure.
What's she call herself now?
Lady Scott.
Oh.
And the lady is denying the claim.
Is it chilly in here, sir?
No, I'm quite warm, thanks.
I'll just shut the door for now. You can draw back from the fire if you want. There's only a few regulars in tonight. So, it's in a book, is it?
A very reputable author. A very vivid portrayal, and the lady is objecting to the portrayal of her. Objecting most strongly. It's a book which may have to be withdrawn completely. A great pity, I think.
What's it say?
Well, it calls a spade. That there was an adulterous affair.
Oh, yeah.
You know that?
Oh, ask anybody round here.
Do you know the Robinsons?
I knew the father, the one who died. It's the son who's at the hall now, the one Branwell, he was tutor to.
What was he like, Bramwell?
Oh, lovely.
Was he?
He shouldn't have done that to... Oh, dear. I mean, not with her.
No, it's a bad do.
If something like that was going to happen, you'd think it would be one of the Robinsons' daughters. One of those eloped finally.
I didn't know that.
With an actor. Met him at Scarborough.
Who led who on, do you think?
Between Branwell and...
Yes.
Oh, I couldn't say.
Did somebody... Oh, it's a delicate subject. Discover them?
Oh, that was Robert Pottage.
Who's he?
He was the gardener.
Pottage?
Yeah.
Good name for a gardener.
Yeah.
Do you know how or where? I have to ask.
Well, you won't
No,
say...
whatever you tell me is confidential.
In the boathouse.
By the river.
People thought, well, you can imagine, well, had a laugh, but I think it was quite upsetting at the time for Robert. He was very fond of his master, you see.
You mean what to do about it?
He was brought up on the estate.
So he told his master.
Finally. But I think he troubled his conscience.
I can understand the problem. Is he still in the area?
No, he left a long time ago. Just packed up and went.
Packed up.
When Mr. Robinson was dying. Well, you wouldn't want to stay on if you've reported your mistress for something like that.
You mean when she takes over?
Well, you'd be out of a job fast, wouldn't you?
Did he tell people what he'd seen?
Oh, I don't know about people. He must have told somebody for it to have got around. There was a lot of gossip at the time. Everybody knew.
Do you know where he is now?
No.
Did anybody else know at the hall what was going on?
Anne Marshall would.
She was,
Mrs. Robinson's personal maid.
of course, still with her mistress.
No, she died. A few years ago now.
And there's a medical man, isn't there? He's mentioned in this book.
Dr. Crosby.
That's it. Is he...
Lives in the next village.
There was nothing on Pottage, the aptly named gardener, sadly. None of the taproom regulars knew where he'd finished up. Staffordshire, somebody thought. But this was Thursday. I'd still got to get back to Haworth and to be back in London by Sunday. So Pottage and his secrets had to be left. I went to bed feeling some progress had been made. Both Mr. Bronte and the landlady, 70 miles between them, were both confident that an affair had taken place. It was proving it in a court of law. No hard evidence. And gossip, even universally believed gossip, wasn't going to be good enough. I was out and about early. Too early for the household, I think.
Dr. Crosby,
Yes?
my name's Down. I'm very sorry for visiting you unannounced.
He was still in his dressing gown. He was a retired gentleman.
I'm a sergeant in the detective police from London.
A widower and very nice gentleman, as it turned out. Just him and a servant who I think lived out.
Well, do come in. Would you mind waiting in here?
A study full of books, on the shelves, on the desk, ankle high on the floor.
Let's find you a place to sit.
Comfortable retirement. Dull comfort, he called it. And he'd been reading Mrs. Gaskell's book. I see you've already bought what I've come about, sir.
Well, it's not very often you find yourself in a book among distinguished company.
Coffee was produced, and he had a question for me.
I'm not surprised this book's caused a problem. What did he die of, Bramwell?
I don't know.
He was a healthy lad. Healthy enough. I didn't know he'd finish up like that. No idea. She's a novelist, isn't she? The author, Mrs. Gaskell.
There's a lot of novelists, sir. It's like coming across a hive of
The
ants.
account of Bramwell's death, it's upsetting. She doesn't say what he died of, and I'd like to know. The way she writes, it's like he died of a broken heart, as if Lydia Robinson killed him. If I were her, I'd be objecting, and strongly. Whatever happened between them. You don't know what killed him?
No.
Maybe you should find out. Because it wasn't fate or a broken heart. She writes as if it's inevitable. That's the novelist in her. Have you ever been to an opera?
No.
Italian opera, they die like that. The heroine, generally.
People can die from broken hearts, sir.
If they want to. I lost my wife 15 years ago. And not a day goes by when I don't miss her. Branwell was a young man. I'm surprised he let himself go. Something else carried him off, finally. He knew what he was doing, and, well, you take the consequences.
Could you see what was happening?
No, I couldn't say that. I heard the gossip.
Did he ever say?
No. I'm a friend of the Robinsons. Still am. I don't see Edmund much. He's the one at the Hall now, the one Branwell tutored. But I was a friend of Branwell, too, when he was here.
What was he like?
Oh, very, very good company. Knew his social value. Played music, painted, poetry. A talented boy. Not enough to do. Not at the Hall, not with Edmund. He'd knock at the door. Do you fancy a walk? He wasn't worked off his feet at all. We'd walk across the stubble. Autumn time. All the way to York once. Old Borough Bridge.
You wrote to him after he'd been dismissed?
Well, not till after Mr. Robinson died. She got me to send him some money.
And Mrs. Robinson to Bramwell? Through you? Why would she do that, sir?
I think she wanted to get rid of him. She was in a very emotional state after her husband died.
What was the money for, sir?
£10.
What was it for?
I think she worried that he might be on his way to see her. She didn't want him just turning up at the door.
Did she write?
No, it came from me.
Why?
Because there was no hope.
Well, Bramwell had hopes of her.
Yes,
And she wanted rid of him.
yes.
Was this anything to do with the contents of her husband's will, sir?
Nothing at all.
You've seen what Mrs. Gaskell wrote about that?
Yes, she gets it wrong. Where's that come from?
I'm not entirely sure.
Branwell, I would imagine.
Would he have grounds for believing that he was mentioned in the will?
He might have been told that.
By whom?
I wasn't the only person she got to communicate with him. Some servant went over to Haworth to talk to him. It's in the book. Mrs. Gaskell guessed that right. In her position, it all had to be done second-hand.
She asked you to write.
Would I do her a favour? I'll give her this credit. I think she felt very badly about the way she'd treated her husband. And it's not unusual after the loved one has died for the bereaved to accuse themselves of all manner of things that they've done to hurt their spouse. And her husband had stuck by her.
Why?
Well, she was a beautiful woman. In a dangerous position. There was the possibility of scandal. He wasn't in the best of health.
Her husband had had a report, hadn't he, of something definite
So I'm told.
at the boathouse.
That was a story I heard, yes. I suppose she could have put the blame on Bramwell, distanced herself, I don't know. Who knows what goes on between husband and wife?
The Reverend Robinson was an invalid.
Yes, towards the end. You mean, was he impotent? Well, he might have been. Not married yourself?
No.
Ever been in love?
Yes.
Did it go wrong or right?
Never really got going.
Oh, just the once.
Oh, once was enough.
Did she marry somebody else?
Eventually.
Did you ever tell of your love?
No. It was
You
hopeless.
see what I mean?
About Bramwell, yes.
It didn't destroy you.
I got a dog, sir. And I don't think there's much room for depression of the spirits in the police force, sir. You said you wrote several times. You kept up the correspondence.
No, he wrote to me.
About?
Money. When he wanted money.
From?
Her. When he was in debt or whatever he wanted money for, well, it's obvious now. Drink. Or whatever helped kill him. Polite letters, fancy phrasing, but I was the intermediary, pure and simple. He wasn't just the injured innocent.
He tapped her for money. It implies a connection between them.
Oh, yes. And she wanted to keep him sweet and no scandal. They closed ranks at the first serious possibility of scandal. People like that do.
She was a different class.
And people like that get their way. If Bramwell had hopes, they were foolish. She was never going to marry a penniless tutor.
The skies, which had been leaden since my arrival in the north, had turned to blue by the time I toiled back up Haworth Main Street. And what had seemed a grey little town was suddenly also green and yellow. People were sitting out in the evening, on doorsteps, kids playing. There was a message waiting for me when I got back, from the parsonage. Mr. Bronte sent a message to the bull asking if I'd call up to see him.
Oh, he's out visiting at the moment. Mr. Nichols is in. Will he do?
Martha Brown, maid of all work at the parsonage, and with her, I come to the main fatality of the case.
Hello, dogs.
They're friendly things, sir.
What are they called?
Cato and Plato.
Oh, I see.
That wouldn't be my choice, but they don't know.
Yes.
In my line, you pay attention to the servants, and I didn't. She wasn't mentioned in the book.
Gentlemen to see you,
Well,
sir.
not directly. She didn't know my name. I didn't know hers.
Oh, Mr. Down. We weren't quite sure when you were getting back.
It was strange, being in the presence of someone whose awkward proposal of marriage to Charlotte I'd been reading about little over 12 hours before.
Well, you'd better, I'm not sure if... Please sit down.
It was a study, carved out at the back of the house.
Did you have any success with your mission at Thorpe Green, Mr. Down?
Some progress, sir, but nothing definitive. Though he shrank with distrust from me, the book suggested a man of strong feelings, though very reserved, deeply in love for some considerable time before his short-lived marriage.
My father-in-law never perceived the great interest in my late wife's personal history felt by strangers. My feeling was against the book. But there were articles in magazines, newspaper gossip, tittle-tattle, too many falsehoods, malignant sometimes. It was thought better that a biography was attempted.
The study, which had probably been a pantry or storeroom at one time, was close to the kitchen, and for a clearer understanding of what is to follow, the servant Martha would have been perfectly able to hear our conversation.
I know Mr. Bronte feels that you are entitled to all the help he can manage. On the matter of the will, his recollection is that the information about Branwell's being prohibited by Mr. Robinson from ever seeing his wife again came directly from Branwell's own lips. You are seeing a Mr. Grundy, I believe?
I hope to.
He also may be able to help you. He and Branwell met and corresponded after Branwell's dismissal.
It's possible that Bramwell was lied to about the will.
I don't think that would surprise anybody. It was a mistake on Mrs. Gaskell's part to be so definite on an issue where her information was quite possibly at fault.
Would Bramwell embellish a story like that?
He could be hysterical. The last years of his life were pitiful. He was a great trial to everyone here.
He shared a bed with your father-in-law latterly.
Yes. Set fire to his own bed. Drunk, probably. He couldn't be trusted. And there it is in public print.
I have to say, though it's not my place to, but I think it's a moving story, sir.
I think some things should remain private, Mr. Down.
You make my heart go dum-dum-dum-dum. He's present by his close, one moving as one. In this fever dream, the night's just begun. Echoes of our laughter, lost in the sound. In this house of love, will never come down. Let the bass drop, feel it in your soul. We're unstoppable, losing control. Hands up high, reaching for the sky. In this night, we'll fly. Dum-dum-dum-dum-dum. Dum-dum-dum-dum. You make my heart go. Dum-dum-dum-dum. You make my heart go. Dum-dum-dum-dum. You make my heart go.
We had no idea that Mrs. Gaskell would reveal so much. Despite his... Well, there are private doubts here about the wisdom of some of Mrs. Gaskell's judgments, though I think we are both unwilling at this time to raise any question about her veracity. It's fair to say that my father-in-law feels that the account of the affair at Thorpe Green is substantially and shamefully accurate.
I'm convinced of that myself, sir. It's the clincher that's lacking.
Clincher? You mean proof of guilt?
Difficult after a dozen years.
Yes, an unpleasant duty. If there are any further matters with which we can help you...
Yes?
Fine. My father-in-law wonders if you would perhaps like to join us for lunch tomorrow.
Oh, that would be very kind.
When do you return to London?
I think later tomorrow. Whether by accident or design, the servant Martha caught up with me as I made my way down from the parsonage.
Were you here for the concert, sir?
No. Was it good?
Very good. Lots of people there.
Did you know Bramwell?
Yes, very well.
Have you worked at the parsonage long?
Since I was 11. And I used to do jobs before then.
Do you remember him coming home from where he was a tutor?
I do. Are you a writer, sir?
A writer?
Like Mrs. Gaskell?
No. I'm a policeman.
Are you?
Yes. Did you talk to Mrs. Gaskell?
I did. Is it about some letters?
Yes.
Mr. Bronte was asking about that. From that woman?
Yes. Was it you that told Mrs. Gaskell he carried them round with him?
Yes.
How did you know they were from her?
I don't know.
Did you see these letters?
No.
Did you burn them?
No? Why?
Are you certain they were from Mrs. Robinson?
There were letters.
But from the lady he worked for?
I thought they were. I think my dad told me.
Your dad?
Yeah.
And he is?
He died, sir. He was the sexton.
You're John Brown's daughter.
He would have been able to tell you for definite, sir.
Martha! Oh, sorry, sir.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, all right. So, our paths parted.
Good night, sir.
Good night, Martha. Something was puzzling me. I was looking for written evidence, letters, proof of guilt, sadly lacking. The thought had struck me. It was this. If Mrs. Robinson had indeed sent Branwell letters that might strongly suggest her guilt, and that might, for all she knew, be still in existence, would she be confident enough to bring a legal action? It would have been a recklessness bordering on madness. As it turned out, the kind of written evidence I wanted did exist. They were in Haworth, and I missed them. With my morning tea, there was a letter from the man Francis Grundy, Branwell's friend, who would be happy to call over to Haworth later that morning. My first job was to collar the landlord. The Black Bull had been one of Branwell's haunts.
Mr. Sugden? Yes? I wonder if you could spare me a moment.
He had indeed been there in Branwell's time, or Patrick, as they called him in the town.
Oh, we'd send up to parsonage if we'd got a visitor who disliked eating or drinking alone.
Why?
We were a bright lad. Free drink. He'd keep people entertained with his chatter. He knew a lot. Book learning, like. He could take you round London, and he'd never been there. Well, not then.
I'm looking
But
into...
the reason for my visit was already becoming known.
Oh, Mrs. Gaskell and her husband stayed here. I talked to her myself.
There's an incident in the book where Mrs. Robinson, after her husband's death, sends a servant here.
Aye, remember it well. They were shut up just over there, just off the hall there, private room.
They were on their own.
An hour or more.
You couldn't hear what was said?
No.
Well, you were knocking about.
Aye, but not to listen in.
No. So what happened?
Well, then the coachman fella comes out and pays his bill, as far as I remember. Gets on his horse and sets off back to York. No sign of Patrick. I didn't take much notice. And then there's this sound. It's like a bloody bleating of a calf. And what's that? It's like an animal sound. And it's the lad. He's fallen into some kind of stupor, a fit.
Why?
Well, not drink. Grief. He'd just been told he'd been forbidden to see the woman again, Mrs.
Robinson. Why?
She'd forfeit her fortune.
You told Mrs. Gaskell that?
Aye. She wrote it down.
Did the coachman say anything to you direct?
No.
Branwell told you?
Aye, or I heard.
That night?
Later. He were blubbing, and John Brown came to pick him up.
And they were friends?
Aye. John had sought him out if he was in a bad way. He couldn't go back up to Parsonage like that.
What did John call him?
What do you mean?
Well, did he call him Patrick or Branwell?
I can't remember. But it might have been somewhat a bit cruder.
But looked after him. How old was he, John?
Oh, quite a bit older than Patrick.
You call him Patrick?
Well, everybody did, aye. He were well liked.
And Branwell to his family?
Aye. He wanted to get away from them, didn't he?
You cultivate a healthy taste for the open air if you're a policeman. If you learn nothing else on the job, you learn how to walk. And while waiting for Grundy, I hopped over a few stiles. There was no time to reach what seemed like billowing waves, the real wildness, but there was the sweet smell of heath and a sky wide as anything. I've been accused of a cheerful nature, but it was hard to imagine on a morning like that how a young man from a family like that could sink into the endless night of addiction.
It's a bit different from my usual patch.
Oh, where's that?
East End.
Huh?
No, it's got its charms. The air's different, I tell you.
Grundy, who was waiting for me when I got back, was a likeable fellow from Lancashire with a handshake that cracked your fingers.
Oh, I couldn't live in London. I have to go there sometimes.
He'd worked on the railways, was an engineer when Branwell had had a job as a station clerk.
He tried to get away from here a number of times. Never succeeded.
And you knew him?
When he worked on the Leeds and Manchester Railway. He liked the railways, was doing well, could have risen quite high, but he probably thought it was beneath him, threw it away.
How?
Drink, casualness. He was in a position of responsibility. It was only a little station, Ludington Foot, but he had a fair bit of freedom and got the boot.
Why?
He'd go off on walks, or somewhere like this place, leaving the porter in charge. There was a discrepancy in the accounts. I don't think it was dishonesty, but Branwell was the man responsible. That's what he was paid for, so it was back here. Carelessness, neglect. I brought you a letter. After he got the sack, we kept in touch. I don't know if this helps. We'd been out of contact for a period while he'd been at Thorpe Green, then this came.
It was a letter in small, neat handwriting dated October 1845, a few months after his sacking from his post as tutor. He talked of the lady's declarations of more than ordinary feeling, of an attachment and reciprocations which I had little looked for. How during those years he had daily what he described as troubled pleasure, soon chastened by fear.
It does help.
Is that what you're looking for?
Well, it's something on paper. It is romantic, isn't it? The way he expresses himself.
Yes, he could be like that.
Attachment, reciprocations. All that could be quite chaste.
I think it went beyond that.
Did he ever tell you?
No, but John Brown did.
Can I take it away with me?
Oh, I'd like it back.
Certainly,
eventually.
I'm just looking at this line. Troubled pleasure soon chastened by fear. What do you take that to mean?
That he felt bad about it, or said he did. Scared they get found out.
Puts it in inverted commas, the whole phrase. It's as if he's quoting a line of poetry.
He often did.
Dresses things up a bit.
Yeah, he could do.
You see, if this came to court, he could be accused of being a fantasist.
Well, he was. Did it happen, do you mean?
Well, I'm convinced it did, but it's convincing others.
It wouldn't be the first affair he'd had. He told me once he'd fathered a child.
Where?
His first job. Before he worked on the railways, another tutor's job in Lancashire somewhere. He was 19. She was a working girl. Worked on a farm, I think. And the child had died. I don't think they knew about that up at the parsonage. They got rid of him from that job. I think the reasons got all hushed up. 5 years on, he's up to the same tricks, only this time it's with his employer's wife.
Not an innocent.
No. Whatever they thought at home. They'd always give him the benefit of the doubt.
Indulge him.
He was the only boy. Could get away with it.
But he didn't. Not finally.
Oh, I'm not saying he's wicked.
The book says she was. She seduced him.
I've not read it yet. What's it say?
Paramore. Wicked woman.
And rich.
Wow, very.
Husband dies, Branwell sees his opportunity.
Of escape.
She can look after him. It's better than the railways.
If he was as brilliant as people say he was, well, couldn't he have done better for himself?
Too much expected. He was supposed to be a genius.
Was he?
He was clever. And clever at skipping off work, too. Loved company. Didn't like being on his own. Very lively with a drink or two inside.
When did he become a habitual drinker?
I think it was always there. He was a sad sight towards the end. I saw him, only a few months before he died. Here, this room. We'd had another gap. He'd not been well. I knew that usually meant one thing.
Drinking.
He was going insane, he said. He wrote to me. I don't think it's one for your purposes. It wasn't even coherent. He says his nights are nights of horror. I think he was taking opium as well. He's 28. In a bad way. He'd only got to look at his writing. So I called over, put up here, and the first surprise was to see his father's head round the door. Branwell was in bed, had been in bed all day. It was September time. He warned me to prepare for a change in him. When the door opened, and I got the first view of him, he was like a cadaver. Cheeks hollowed, eyes sunken in and pale. Pale as death. Brandy revived him. Hot brandy. But he was frightened. He'd been in bed weeks. Glancing round like... well... he talked about Satan a lot. He wasn't sane. Not in his right mind, only in patches. Thought I was Satan. Oh, knew I wasn't. Had brought a carving knife with him, just in case. Was going to stab Satan with it. He was waiting for death. Wished it, I think. Saw death at the bed end.
In what way?
I was going to say, as real as you sitting opposite me, but they were fantasies, illusions he thought real. He said it was the relationship, the disastrous relationship with his employer's wife that was killing him.
Is that what you thought?
He failed at every job he undertook. I don't like to say it. And then this great romance failed, and he's back where he started, here, with his drinking pals. He's the one who's supposed to do well. Everything he touched. If she did kill him, he let her.
Lunch at the parsonage was at 2.
There are mistakes. There are mistakes in any noble enterprise. We must allow the biographer a little romance, a little licence.
I think Mrs. Gaskell's claims are well-founded. I have no or little information to prevent a legal action, though.
I think the picture of my unhappy son and his seducer are masterpieces.
The account is true in substance?
Yes.
But that is not enough.
One letter to Mr. Grundy written after the fact.
Not the clincher.
No.
In my opinion, the book is worthy of what one great woman would have written of another.
But there are parts of the book with which you disagree.
There are some queer things in it, to be sure.
What do they say?
Have you finished, sir?
Oh, about myself. Thank you, Martha. I don't deny that I'm somewhat eccentric. She said I restricted my children to a vegetable diet and so on. Can you see that as likely, Martha?
No, I can't, sir.
Explosions of passion, breaking furniture, how I burnt hearth rugs. That's ridiculous. As if I was some half-mild recluse. I would not like you, Mr. Down, to think that by Mrs. Gaskell putting down certain bizarre things about myself, that I am in any way questioning...
I understand.
Now, these are trivial matters. But she tells the truth about Branwell.
What did he die of, sir?
A wasting of the body. He wanted to die.
Wanted to die?
The cause of death was marasmus, this wasting disease.
Or a consumption. It's rife in the village.
It was imperceptible at first, then quite sudden. There was a preoccupation with death. His nights were troubled. It's her fault, he'd say. Her fault.
The fault was in himself.
His sorrows were real enough, Arthur. But there was no self-restraint. He lost the path. Despaired. I weep for the loss of talent. Talents misused. He came to repentance finally. There was much good in him. Now, Martha, what's for pudding?
Apple pie, sir.
He had died in his father's arms. There was more pain and suffering in that household than I had any knowledge of when I entered it.
He painted himself out of this one.
After lunch, I was shown the pictures on the stairs that Branwell had painted.
You can see that quite clearly.
That made the painting too crowded, he said. He left me with 3 daughters. It's a fair likeness. He captures them.
A novelist can sum up a place with a detail. The look of a wardrobe or someone's gloves just left on a chair. What I remember about the parsonage was the clock, hall clock. It ticked, if I can put it this way, slowly. I'd to be in London for a meeting with the publisher's solicitors the next day. I'd no real hopes by then of anything that would stop the legal action.
It's here. It's this one.
The likelihood was, I thought, that all the secrets were buried under the pavement of Howth Church.
They've put Miss Charlotte's memorial just to one side.
Martha had offered to show me the memorial in the church which her father had helped set up.
My dad did the lettering.
It was a sad record of loss. 6 children. Mother who went first. Mother's sister who brought them up.
Aunt Branwell. He was her favourite. Everybody liked him, you know. You couldn't help not. Any time he wanted, he could make me laugh.
It's my experience that people begin to say the interesting and useful things when you're on the doorstep or about ready to leave.
He was all right. I mean, he was on his feet till just 2 days before he died. My uncle saw him there, just at the entrance there, coming back up to the parsonage. He'd only got that low step to mount, and my uncle saw him having to catch hold of the gatepost.
Your uncle?
My dad's brother. Was it letters or something like that you were looking for, sir?
Yes, why?
I think my dad had some letters.
From Branwell?
Yeah. I think my uncle took them.
When your father died?
Yeah,
Your uncle's called?
William. He's sexton now.
I'd a bit of time left before the coach would get me to Keighley for the journey back to London, so walked down to Martha's uncle. But he was out. People write stories about detectives these days, and in these stories the detective invariably solves the mystery which has confronted the reader. This was an uncommon case, and I suppose you'd call it a failure. There were letters, I later learnt, between Martha's father and Branwell during Branwell's time at Thorpe Green. But because they didn't represent either of the men in a favourable light, and being somewhat of a crude sexual nature, not wanting to cause distress to the Reverend Bronte or his family, William had suppressed them. In one of them, Branwell sought advice from his friend and drinking companion John as to what to do with this woman, giving chapter and verse of her attentions to him, and who wanted, he wrote, to go to what he called extremities. My mistress is too damnably fond of me, and so on. It left little to the imagination. He signed off, not with his own name, Patrick or Branwell, but another, Jacob, son of Joseph. I'm not a keen student of the Bible, but Jacob is the term used for a supplanter, the cuckoo in the nest. It was too late. All unsold copies of the book were returned to the publisher, all passages relating to the former Mrs. Robinson excised, and a public apology made. There was an affair, all right. She cast him off when he didn't suit her. We talk about victim or villain. It's not my job to moralise or cast sentence, but you can make yourself a victim. And in my line of work, well, you know, if you'd taken a different turning in the road, you might just do the same yourself. There's no manual or map to help you. There's a wasteland. We all know it sometime or another. I've seen it time and time again. The seamy, sad side of things, or foul fiend, whatever you want to call it. You can get overwhelmed. It's easy. You have to fight it, or go under.
Death at Bed End starred Kenneth Cranham as Sergeant Jack Down, James Green as Patrick Bronte, Stephen Hogan as Mr. Nichols, Declan Wilson as Harry, Shirley Dixon as Betty, Geoffrey Whitehead as Dr. Crosby, Helen Longworth as Martha, Steve Hodgson as Sugden, and Philip Fox as Grundy. The director was Janet Whittaker.